Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday the 21st of September and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and this evening I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh. First we will have a look at today's coronavirus updates, then I will introduce this evening's guest, and then we will look at the stories behind today's news headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,085,345 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,546,526 have been confirmed negative, and 538,819 have tested positive. There are 2,870 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test today, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. I'm afraid to say that there are 18 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,396. And this number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of those who have tested positive, 1,107 were in hospital last night, 94 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,160,835 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,813,547 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 135,455 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that is an increase of 203 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. We also have an update from the Office of National Statistics this evening. The number of deaths from all causes in the UK in the week ending the 10th of September 2021 was 12,503. That's 19.7% above the average for the corresponding week in the period between 2015 and 2019. Deaths were above the 5-year average in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. There were 994 deaths involving coronavirus registered in the week ending the 10th of September, accounting for 8% of all deaths in the UK, and this is an increase from 781 deaths in the week before. Of these, 994 deaths were registered involving COVID-19, accounting for around 1 in 12 deaths, that's 8%. And the number of deaths from COVID-19 was the highest since the week ending the 19th of March 2021. Now, I'm delighted to say that we are joined this evening by one of our regular contributors, the former Deputy Presiding Officer of our Scottish Parliament and Straven's own Cavaliere, Linda Fabiani. Good evening, Linda.
Hello.
How are you keeping?
Oh, I'm absolutely grand. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, it's great to see you and thank you for joining us this evening.
I've ever been called Cavaliere on the telly.
Well, that's your hashtag from now on. Our first story this evening is that additional funding of £20 million will be invested in the Scottish Ambulance Service to help improve response times, alleviate pressures, and improve staff well-being. The Health Secretary Humza Yousaf set out today in a statement to Parliament that the new investment will deliver the following: assistance from more than 100 military personnel, 88 drivers and 15 support staff, following final approval by the Ministry of Defence. These personnel are expected to begin deployment from this weekend. Around 100 second-year paramedic students to help in ambulance control rooms. More hospital ambulance liaison officers at the busiest A&Es, increasing from 11 to 20, helping ensure timely admission of patients at A&E and reducing ambulance waiting times. Additional help from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in the form of volunteer drivers, as well as the British Red Cross and private transport companies where clinically appropriate. Immediate work to create temporary admission wards in hospitals, meaning patients can be admitted quicker. Additional senior clinical input in ambulance control rooms and to assist and speed up decision-making on mental health, addictions, falls, breathing difficulties, high-intensity users and trauma, £500,000 to fund staff wellbeing measures, and 14 additional staff members in the Highlands to reduce the on-call requirement in Campbellton and to remove it completely in Fort William, Kirkwall and Broadford. Today's funding comes in addition to £20 million already announced as part of the NHS recovery plan. That investment will deliver a net increase of almost 300 ambulance staff by April 2022. Now, Linda, as I say, there was an announcement at the beginning of the month of £20 million and 296 additional jobs over 2 years. And now, about 2 weeks later, we have another £20 million being spent. Does that suggest that the previous announcement wasn't up to the mark?
Yeah, I guess it does, Andrew. I mean, there's been issues with the ambulance service for some years now, and even prior to COVID, there was a recognition that there were workforce issues, and there was additional funding put in place from memory. I can't remember how much it was. So this has been an ongoing thing, and I think what's happened is, there has been a steady strategy of building capacity within the ambulance service. And then COVID has come along, the pandemic has come along, and of course that's just kicked everything into touch. But I find it really interesting that the outrage by some that we now have the military going to assist and we have the fire service going to assist. The Red Cross have always assisted the ambulance service, so it's not sort of humanitarian aid getting flown in to look at a disaster. The Red Cross have always been there and complementary to the service. Taxis have been used previously in some situations along with volunteers, but of course that's now been upped. So the public services are really pulling together here to try and get us out of what would be ridiculous not to recognise it as a crisis. However, what's also ridiculous is that some commentators, some opposition politicians are pretending that this only affects Scotland. This is an issue right across the UK. I mean, it was back in August that there was hospital trusts in the southeast of England were asking the military for assistance. Wales has submitted the application to the military, and I understand that they're waiting on the response back. I don't know the up-to-date situation in Northern Ireland, although I did hear a report on the radio this morning that there were big issues in Northern Ireland too. So this is a matter that is affecting the whole of the UK. And what's really important is that public services and everyone else pulls together, because some of the stories we've heard recently have been absolutely ridiculous. And, I have to say that even though I'm not an elected member anymore, people still do on occasion get in touch. And here in Lanarkshire, as well as in Glasgow and Greater Clyde area, people have been waiting too long. Some terrible stories. We've seen some of them publicised. So perhaps it should have been looked at earlier as a crisis. However, we're at where we're at now, and I think it's got to be all hands on deck here.
And I think your point about it being a widespread problem is absolutely right, Linda. I was talking to family from Detroit, Michigan on Sunday night, and they're struggling with exactly the same problems in the northeast US. So it's not even a UK only problem. Although your point, it maybe does give us an idea of the very narrow horizons of some opposition politicians in Scotland, that they can't see further than Berwick. I was wondering, the Scottish Ambulance Service has about 5,000 staff, I think, and if we were to extrapolate the announcement at the beginning of the month, which was 300 jobs at a cost of £20 million, and now we've another £20 million, so that might be another 300. For the sake of argument, it might be another 300 jobs. Do you think adding 600 staff to a staff of 5,000 is that going to be enough, or are we going to have to do more?
I hope it's enough, and I hope that there's ongoing monitoring and systems put in place that could perhaps be more efficient. But I think we all have to remember too that in all public services at the moment we're suffering from people who are contracting COVID, people who are self-isolating. And when you're looking at a service within our National Health Service, you're looking at the likes of ambulance drivers, paramedics, and all these people who are receiving at hospitals. Now, they are folk who have to be very, very thorough about staying away from work if there are issues. I didn't hear the statement today, so I don't know if there was any discussion about what the capacity of the service is at the moment in terms of people being off sick. So there's always going to be sickness leave, there's always going to be annual leave, and cover has to be given. But I would be interested to know what the current sickness rate is, because I'm sure that's affecting the ambulance service, same as it's affecting council workers and all elements of local government right across the NHS.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that the UK government is under growing pressure to U-turn on its £1,040 universal credit cuts and introduce a new energy payment to help lower income families cover the cost of fuel bills during the UK's energy crisis. After the Tory Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng admitted to BBC Breakfast that it could be a very difficult winter for families, Stephen Flynn MP said that the response so far from the UK government is nowhere near good enough, and he called for immediate support for hard-pressed families. The SNP Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy spokesperson said low and middle-income families were already being hammered by Tory cuts, tax rises and the cost of Brexit, and he called for an emergency package of measures to boost household incomes. Commenting, he said, "The Chancellor must stop sitting on his hands and instead deliver an emergency package to protect household incomes, including by immediately reversing the £1,040 Tory cut to universal credit and introducing a new energy payment for lower income families." Now, in addition, Linda, Energy Action Scotland has said that households living off the gas grid, so that's not connected to the national mains gas network, often struggle the most with fuel costs. And they've calculated that while the average UK dual fuel bill comes to £1,138, the average bill in Scotland is £1,759. And for those with electricity only, that figure rises to £2,276. So do you think Kwasi Kwarteng has any idea at all about the challenges of energy poverty and extreme energy poverty faced by the people of the Western Isles?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, this has always been an issue, even before this particular crisis, because when people live off the grid, it's generally because they're in remote and isolated areas. Ergo, they're probably, it's going to be colder, they are more at the mercy of weather and the lack of so many services that we all take for granted. So no, I don't think it is recognised. I don't think it's ever been recognised by any UK government, I have to say. But we're in a particular situation just now. I've been so shocked when I'm listening to the reports of the gas situation and how it's likely, prices are likely to rise here. There's always been fuel poverty. It's been an issue for a long, long time. So as far as I'm concerned, the baseline has to be to reverse this cut in universal credit. That's the very minimum. And from that baseline, you have to look at making sure that going into winter, people are not sitting frozen in their houses. People are not having to choose between being warm and eating. Because in a society where we have fuel poverty, where we have food banks, for goodness sake, and we're still cutting assistance to people, it's barbaric. It's just absolutely horrendous. So they really, I would call straight, I agree with what Stephen Flynn said this morning, I heard him. And, the very minimum has got to be to reverse this universal credit cut of 20 quid a week. And look at increasing assistance through the winter months, because winter's almost here. I mean, we're in autumn now, really. And already we can feel temperatures starting to drop. And the further north you go and the further northwest you go in Scotland, the colder it's going to become. And there's parts of England that suffered from that as well. Though Scotland has wild weather in abundance in winter. So is it Fuel Action Scotland? I can't remember the name. They have been campaigning for a long, long time. Fuel Poverty Action, campaigning for a long, long time for those off the grid. But we're in the middle of this pandemic. We now have the added problem of the rise in fuel costs. So the UK government should be looking at giving assistance to everyone who's vulnerable.
Thanks, Linda. You mentioned the reversal of the uplift in the £20 universal credit payment, and a UK government spokesman said that that uplift was always temporary and only to help claimants through the economic shock of the toughest stages of the pandemic. So, if it was temporary, why end it precisely now as we approach winter? Do you think Johnson's determined to pull off some kind of Dickensian fantasy and become Ebenezer Scrooge for Christmas 2021?
Oh, Andrew, why do you say that? Nothing would surprise me with that man. I mean, we're still in crisis. We're not through the pandemic yet, and we're facing winter. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he comes out with his ho-ho-hos and wears a Santa cap and said, I have decided for Christmas we'll change my mind, and I personally will insist that this cut doesn't happen. It would be welcome, of course it would, but it would also be so disingenuous. But that seems to be the way this man works.
Well, it's a good point you make, Linda. We've certainly seen from time to time the approach of almost confecting a crisis and using that crisis to then make a decision, not being able to think strategically or think deeply, and instead apparently creating a situation where the decision is almost made for him because things have become so bad. So that's maybe correct. And to follow on from the point with regard to maybe a lack of understanding in Westminster of families across the UK, but in particular in more remote parts of Scotland, or parts of Scotland from which London is more remote, to be fair. We've got energy prices skyrocketing, we've got inflation rising, we've got the end of furlough, and the removal of the £20 per week universal credit uplift, all at a time when apparently Kwasi Kwarteng can predict what the weather's going to be like over the winter. Does any of this stack up at all?
No, I think this is a UK government of complete chaos. But when you look at the record, they had, okay, the pandemic was unforeseen. Of course it was. None of us saw that coming down the tracks and hitting us. But the whole Brexit chaos was not unforeseen. That was deliberate UK government policy. They lied about the effects of Brexit. Didn't Boris Johnson say at one point during that Brexit referendum campaign that fuel costs would be a lot lower if the UK wasn't in part of the European Union? It was deliberate policy. They were given the chance to extend the transition period. They chose not to. So they have created this perfect storm. And, I'm cynical enough to think that it might even have been deliberate, because there's so much just flies under the radar when all this is going on, and they're getting away with so much, and they're not held to account. I don't see any of the mainstream media holding these, I have to be careful in my language, holding these people to account on any of this. They're a disaster. And they just seem to get away with it all the time. Meanwhile, here we are in Scotland, because we've got increased support over a sustainable period for independence, we have the media establishment just hammering the Scottish government all the time, even for things they have no control over. So at the time they turned their eyes to Westminster and saw what was going on down there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. And we'll stay with Kwasi Kwarteng, because UK government ministers have reached a deal with the US firm CF Industries to restart carbon dioxide production at its facilities on Teesside and in Cheshire. The Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng held talks with the company after it stopped work at its fertiliser plants because of the surging gas prices. This has led to a food production crisis, as the CO2 made while manufacturing fertiliser is used to stun animals for slaughter as well as in baking and in vacuum packing products. Boris Johnson acknowledged the government had taken direct steps to safeguard CO2 supplies, although so far there is little detail of the deal. Ian Wright, the chief executive of the Food and Drink Federation, had earlier warned that shoppers may notice products missing from supermarket shelves in about 10 days' time. He said that the potential shortages of CO2 supply were a real crisis, and said the just-in-time system which underpins both supermarkets and the hospitality industry is under the most strain it has ever been in the 40 years it has been there. So, Linda, apparently nowadays the UK's entire food supply is dependent upon only 2 fertiliser factories owned by a private American corporation. Linda, does that sound like a suitably resilient supply chain to you?
No, it certainly does not. And I wasn't aware of it, Andrew, until all this came up and I started looking into it. I mean, at the base of this is a non-affordability issue, not necessarily about the 2 privately owned American fertiliser companies who are looking to make, whatever they can. So, but if you go further down that chain, there must be firms, and the Food and Drink Federation we're talking about, and the Poultry Council, that are just saying we cannot afford these prices. So that's an affordability thing. Therefore, what's happening is the UK government stepping in to help 2 big private companies. No, it's not sustainable at all. And I'm, for one, really interested in finding out more about this. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a few of my colleagues in Westminster who'll be looking at this as well in relation to Scotland. I wasn't aware that it was there. Yeah.
No, absolutely, Linda. And I noticed this morning, excuse me, that Kwasi Kwarteng used the phrase "time is of the essence" this morning. Now, anyone who's dealt with lawyers will likely know what that means, and it means that if a deadline is missed, then the whole thing is going to collapse catastrophically. Now, we know that he's no lawyer, like some other key characters. He read classics at Oxbridge, and then was a newspaper columnist for the Telegraph, and then was a banker. So does he know that what he's signalling? Does he know when he uses that phrase, he's signalling that there is a risk of everything collapsing catastrophically? Or does he just think that it sounds clever?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I mean, we're talking potential pack of cards stuff here, aren't we? You know, the old domino starting at the top and every one of them turning over right down to the double blank. Double blank, that probably sums up the UK government's ministers rather well. But
I think it does.
don't know. I just don't get these people at all. And I mean, it's really shocking that time is of the essence. I mean, when did we hear about this hike and potential further hike in gas costs? It's not that long. So how sustainable is it that within such a short period of time, you're saying time is of the essence, if he's meaning it in the way that you have described it, Andrew? And
Absolutely.
it's really, really worrying. I mean, I'll tell you something, just as an aside, this company, these 2 companies in Teesside and Cheshire, I would be really interested to know more about them, who they are, who are the shareholders, because we've heard so many horror stories over this pandemic of, that old maxim of look to see who gains. It'd be interesting to see in that as well, and I hope some of our investigative journalists, and we have some great ones, will be looking at this very carefully.
Following the money is usually the answer, Linda. You're absolutely correct. We'll stay with energy policy, though, because in the Scottish Parliament today, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero put forward the Scottish Government's proposal in the Net Zero Nation debate. The Net Zero plan is to end Scotland's contribution to climate change within a generation. This is an ambitious target, but the Scottish Government say that they have already succeeded in halving Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions since 1990. The key commitments towards reaching net zero, which were outlined in the programme for government, include playing our part to support a world-changing deal at COP26 in Glasgow, implementing the recommendations of the Just Transition Commission, investing at least £1.8 billion over this Parliament in decarbonising homes and buildings, investing £500 million in our natural economy, and making offshore wind central to our delivery of net zero targets. The Scottish Government's motion was passed 88 votes to 26. An amendment by Labour MSP Monica Lennon to revive the Scottish Government plan for a state energy company was defeated by 97 votes to 19. Addressing the amendment in closing for the Scottish Government, Lorna Slater MSP observed that the situation had changed and that what was needed now was a Scottish Energy Agency. So, Linda, we've been hearing a lot over the past couple of days about there being a lack of wind energy over summer of 2021. Now, that seems very unlikely that that was the case in Scotland this year, or any year for that matter. Do you think that is the UK energy market now completely and utterly broken?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it is utterly and completely broken. Certainly not in Scotland. And it's not just wind energy. The Scottish Government has also invested in hydro energy. And I'd actually like to see more solar going in place as well. And there's a few things interested me about the statement and how you described it there, Andrew. I was sort of laughing at Riley at the expression within a generation, you know, and what is a generation? And I think it's really interesting that when unionist MPs and commentators are talking about generation in relation to an independence referendum, it's almost a century, while they're saying that the generation that the Scottish Government talks about in relation to net zero is far too long. So we can't win on that one. But I report, no, Scotland still has the potential to be a world leader in some of this. And we've already shown it over the past couple of years that we can be. But there's still some big issues. Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary, talked about buildings today. I really worry about this. I used to chair the cross-party group in architecture and the built environment and did for many years. But it's a particular interest that I have. And we don't have developers on board in terms of building, whether it be industrial or whether it be residential. It's a constant frustration to me when I see new housing developments going up all over the place, and they're not coming with mandatory solar panels on the roof. They're not coming with mandatory zero carbon specification, which is possible. I mean, it's years ago that South Lanarkshire College in East Kilbride developed a zero carbon house, for example. It can be done. And the unit costs don't necessarily have to be an awful lot higher than they are when you throw up boxes. Yes, we've increased building standards to a degree, but I don't think we have done it to that's necessary. I know it's difficult when you have on one hand a requirement for houses for people, and on the other hand, you're trying to do your best for the environment. But we haven't done enough to pull all the developers on board. And we haven't given enough credence to the professional architects and others who know exactly how this can be done. We've done far too much of the buy off the shelf stuff, and we really have to seriously look at changing that.
Thanks, Linda. That's a good point. Where in the constituency I live in Edinburgh, there are 18,000 new homes being built at the moment, about 6,000 of them less than a mile away, by 4 different developers. And I've heard said it's been suggested to me that there are some indications of some improvements in the properties. It is said that one of the developers is going to install charging points for cars in every house, for example. But I'll be very interested to see how many of the homes go, as you say, how many of the homes go up with solar panels on the roof. That'll be a very telling development. So I'll come as soon as they're out the ground. I'll come back and tell you, and we'll see what's happening.
Please do. You know, we all have a part to play, and Andrew, I'm certainly not holding myself up as any kind of green champion, because I will be the first to admit that you know, it's not too many years ago that I found all this stuff quite boring. I'll be honest. Because it never felt as if for me, everything had to have a direct relevance to people before I got really interested in it. And it does have a direct relevance to people, of course it does. But it's only in the last few years that I've come to recognise that. And I think that's where most people are at. I've been privileged to learn a lot more through my job. But I think most people don't quite get that this affects each and every one of us and all of our families. So I'm hoping that the big COP26 in Glasgow will energise people to really recognise what's going on. And it's so important that we build on that and don't just say, oh, look at that big event and there's everybody away home. That was nice. We've got to build on, and it's got to be taken very, very seriously.
It's got to be a fork in the road. Absolutely right, Linda. Thank you. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that the SNP has urged the UK government to offer all Afghan citizens whose data has been breached by the Afghan Relocations Assistance Policy, ARAP, immediate asylum in the United Kingdom. The call comes following a Ministry of Defence data breach, which involved the details of 250 Afghan interpreters, all of whom are eligible to come to the UK during the evacuation process, but were cruelly left behind. The data breach has led to Afghans being hunted relentlessly by the Taliban, according to one Afghan interpreter. Commenting, the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson Stuart MacDonald MP said that it was essential that the UK government increased its support for Afghan refugees during the withdrawal process, and said their failure to do so has left thousands of people stranded and fearing for their lives. Mr MacDonald highlighted that the data breach is just the latest in a long list of errors by the MOD and the UK government, which could sadly be one of the costliest in lives. That is why I am urging the Prime Minister to offer every Afghan interpreter whose information has been leaked asylum here in the United Kingdom. It is our fault that their lives are now in danger, therefore it is our responsibility to rescue them, said Mr MacDonald. Now, Linda, you and I were in Broadcasting Scotland together at the time, and I remember that as the Afghan regime collapsed in the second half of August, government ministers did not make a phone call about evacuating Afghan translators who had helped the UK. It was said at first that the then Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was too busy to speak to his Afghan counterpart, with a junior minister being asked to do so instead. But the Foreign Office then admitted that it was not possible to arrange the call before the Afghan government collapsed. So it looks to me like the UK government didn't much care in August, and it doesn't much care now. Do you think they're going to abandon these former UK workers and their families?
Oh man, I mean, just the last and so far in a long list of complete screw-ups over this whole debacle. I mean, this stuff about the data breach, I'm just stunned, absolutely stunned. I mean, I'm not IT savvy in any way, but I know how to avoid that happening. It's fairly straightforward. And the idea that this can happen in the MOD is absolutely appalling. And it makes one wonder. I mean, do MI6 use the same email system as the MOD? I think it's worth finding out about all these government agencies and how they run things. Now, I know that the UK civil service is really bad at that kind of thing, but when you get onto the military, when they're dealing with classified information, or what should be classified information, when they're dealing with people whose lives are in danger, and they're dealing with groups of people who, I mean, there must be spies amongst them. Of course there are. And this information can all get passed around. It's just appalling. I mean, I note the call from my SNP colleagues about giving asylum to all these people straight away. And of course, I absolutely agree that all of these people should be brought here forthwith. How they're going to do it, I don't know. It might be difficult, but absolutely every effort should be expended to make sure they get these people here with their families, because their lives are in danger. The only problem I do have a wee bit with what my former colleague said was it shouldn't be about asylum. But let's not confuse things. Asylum, as we know, is when people come and then make the case for being able to stay in another country. That's what asylum seekers do. They claim asylum, they then make their case, and a decision is made. The decision should have been made. These people worked as interpreters for the UK. Therefore, they should be brought here with their families and allowed to live here. No decision to be taken. It just happens.
Well, I suppose, Linda, it's a good point, although I suppose the UK government's got plenty of form in terms of its treatment of the Gurkha soldiers, its treatment of Chinese staff working on board Royal Naval
Yeah.
ships, its treatment of the people of Diego Garcia. So it's
Yeah.
an old song here a little bit. I was going to ask you a little bit about the politics of this, though, as well. I mentioned the then Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, but do you think that now with Liz Truss in charge of things, will the Foreign Office change? And more importantly, for these folks fearing for their and their families' lives in Afghanistan, will Liz Truss change things for them?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the woman. I've heard things about her, some of which I have to say sounds a bit misogynistic to me. I mean, the woman's no stupid. So it's not about intelligence, it's about the will to do things. Um, does she morally, ethically wish to do the right thing for these people? I hope so. I don't think Dominic Raab had the capacity to really think it through. Speaking out of turn, perhaps, because again, I don't know the man, but he never inspired me with any confidence. Liz Truss doesn't inspire me with confidence, but it is a fresh face. Her background is very interesting. So I would hope, as I say, that she does feel there was a moral obligation here. I listened to, I think it was on radio, BBC Radio 4 over the weekend, a programme where they interviewed a chap, an interpreter who was under the scheme but didn't manage to get out and was staying in a location. They changed his name and things like that, his voice. And it just seems a complete lack of organisation that's been going on in looking after these people, to whom I would say the UK owe an absolute obligation. So let's hope that Liz Truss takes that obligation seriously. But
Indeed.
it also means the Taliban having to play their part as well. I mean, that's the other worry. There's a huge level of diplomacy has to go on here and negotiation between the UK government and what is now the government of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. And we'll now move on to our next story, which is that a third Russian national has been charged over the 2018 Novichok poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury, the British police have said. A man using the name Sergei Fedotov, believed to be about 50 years of age, is alleged to have been working as part of a Russian military unit with Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, who have previously been charged over the poisoning in Wiltshire. Scotland Yard said all three men were working for Russia's GRU military spy agency, the first time it has been explicitly implicated with the GRU, although the then Prime Minister Theresa May blamed it in 2018. Dean Hayden, the Metropolitan Police's Deputy Assistant Commissioner and the Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism, said the trio were believed to have previously worked together as a unit in Bulgaria and the Czech Republic, and possibly other locations. They are not believed to have worked in the UK before the Salisbury attack, although all three had travelled here before. He said the Salisbury attack could have killed thousands, and the three had been involved in similar attacks elsewhere. He also stated for the first time what officers believed to be the real names of all three men, as distinct from the aliases on their passports. Fedotov's real name is believed to be Denis Sergeyev, Boshirov's true identity is believed to be Alexander Mishkin, and Petrov is thought to be called Anatoly Chepiga. The investigative journalism collective Bellingcat, which previously revealed the identities of Petrov and Borisov, as well as identifying Fedotov as his real name, has reported that Fedotov is a high-ranking GRU officer and a graduate of Russia's Military Diplomatic Academy. Like Petrov and Boshirov, Fedotov has been charged with 7 offences, including the attempted murder of the Skripals and DS Nick Bailey, who fell ill after going to the Skripals' home after the Russian pair were found slumped on a bench in Salisbury. The other charges are conspiracy to murder Sergei Skripal, the use and possession of Novichok contrary to the Chemical Weapons Act, and causing grievous bodily harm with intent to Yulia Skripal and D.S. Bailey. Interpol notices have been applied for in respect of Fedotov and remain in place for Petrov and Boshirov. Hayden said there had been no cooperation from Russia in the investigation and there is no extradition treaty, so, outside a diplomatic breakthrough, the police were reliant on them leaving Russia, a prospect he thought unlikely, to have any chance of bringing them to the UK to stand trial. Linda, it sounds, if these reports are correct, it sounds like a very professional team of Russian GRU officers were able to operate with lethal force in leafy Wiltshire. Who do you think should carry the can for this? The border forces or maybe the security service MI5 who claim that their mission statement is to keep the country safe?
Well, it's like something out of a spy novel, isn't it? I mean, there must be some responsibility on the intelligence services in the UK. Of course there must. Because it sounds like this cadre, these operatives, they must be fairly prominent. I mean, they didn't just pick three unknowns off the street or out the private ranks of the Russian military and say, away you go and do this. These are surely people that there is info about, intelligence about, and records about. So now that this has come out, be interested to know, what at UK level is being done to investigate this properly. The other side of this is, the fact that Russia hasn't cooperated in any way, the fact that, I mean, Putin just seems to act with complete impunity and doesn't care. Just doesn't care. And, there's too many apologists for that regime, as far as I'm concerned. This is a seriously nasty regime. The stuff that's been happening in Russia for years now under Putin, when you look at it, is horrendous for the Russian people, or a section of the Russian people. It starts with a lack of ability to properly have democratic elections and things, and goes right through their society, and would appear to be getting worse. But then when it encroaches on other nations in the world, to the level of potentially killing a lot of people, bad enough that they killed people, bad enough that they affected other people in the Salisbury issue, but my goodness, that could have been so disastrous. And
Absolutely.
yet somebody has to be, we have to look at the UK intelligence services and say, why were you not aware that these guys were in this country?
Absolutely, Linda. Now, the Home Secretary this morning told MPs, we will not tolerate such malign activity here in the UK. And we also know that exactly.
Sorry, Andrew.
And
Sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all. We also know that the Tories have been paid at least £2 million by Russian donors since Johnson became Prime Minister. Lyubov Chernyukin, the wife of Putin's former Deputy Finance Minister, Vladimir Chernyukin, has herself given a total of £1.7 million to the Tories herself. So the Home Secretary protesting whilst her party is funded by Russian donors closely connected to Vladimir Putin, isn't that all a bit hollow?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I very rudely interrupted you. It's just like this, we will not tolerate. Aye, right, very good. And it's not just about the donations to the Tory party. I mean, let's not pretend that all Russian people are nasty people. Of course they're not. Not even all Russian oligarchs are nasty people, I suspect. But, it does look like those very close to a horribly nasty regime are funding the Tory party. But it's not just about direct funding. It's also about, I mean, when you look at London, the amount of property that is lying empty and owned by Russian billionaires, millionaires, whatever. And it has just, by the UK government's policies, been allowed to happen. There's other countries that don't allow that kind of thing to happen. But again, it's all about let's have a look and see where the money is, Andrew. Let's have a look and see who benefits out of some of these things. And then to stand up with full outrage and say, we will not tolerate this. Really? Well, what are you going to do about it then? Because words are cheap.
Yes, absolutely, Linda. Absolutely. We're going to carry on with some more Russian news, actually. And Russia's defense ministry has issued a statement this afternoon saying that Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Italy, and other nations scrambled fighter jets to escort two Russian Tupolev Tu-160 Blackjack strategic bombers as they flew over the Baltic Sea, according to the Interfax news agency. The Russian bombers were escorted by Russian fighter jets and flew over neutral waters, the Russian Defense Ministry was quoted as saying. So, Linda, given we've got spies in Salisbury and strategic bombers over the Baltic, did the Cold War ever actually end?
Oh, man. Yeah, you do start to wonder, don't you? There's obviously issues ongoing. Is it a Cold War? I mean, things were really serious then. Our generation can look back, and I remember being quite young and genuinely scared that bombs were going to fall, nuclear bombs were going to fall, because with all these public service adverts and TV and things like that. And there was a wonderful protest movement about nuclear weapons here in the Holy Loch and stuff. And here we are, we've just had a nuclear deal with the US, the UK, and Australia. China are not pleased. France is absolutely livid from what I can see. Complete breakdown in diplomatic terms with all our neighbours. So, yes, I would say there is a Cold War still existing, but the players have widened. And one of my concerns about the pandemic across the world is that it is hiding so much that's going on, really, really important things that are not properly being taken account of, properly scrutinised. And so on a domestic level, I think I said before on your programme, Andrew, that I worry about the UK government slipping things under the radar. This is now happening on a world scale. Major players doing things that we're not hearing about without proper scrutiny. And I'm finding it all really concerning.
Absolutely, Linda. Thank you. We touched on you were kind enough to touch on the news from Iran this morning, and we'll look at that now. Iran said today that talks with world leaders over reviving its 2015 nuclear deal would resume in a few weeks, the official Iranian news agency IRNA reported. Every meeting requires prior coordination and the preparation of an agenda. As previously emphasised, the Vienna talks will resume soon and over the next few weeks, an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said, according to IRNA. The world powers held 6 rounds of indirect talks between the United States and Iran in Vienna to try and work out how both can return to compliance with the nuclear pact, which was abandoned by the former US President Donald Trump in 2018. The Vienna talks were adjourned in June after hardliner Ibrahim Raisi was elected Iran's president and took office in August. Ministers from the UK, China, France, Germany and Russia will not meet jointly with Iran at the UN this week to discuss a return to the talks, a European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell told reporters yesterday. But the spokesman said that the Iranian foreign minister would meet individually with ministers from those countries on the sidelines of the annual UN gathering of world leaders, and the nuclear deal and the Vienna talks would be among the main topics under discussion. So, Linda, in the usually carefully choreographed world of international diplomacy, is it important, do you think, that this announcement came from the Iranian Foreign Ministry?
Hmm. I hadn't really thought that through, Andrew. Now you mention it, yes, it probably is. And you wonder if perhaps they're trying to bounce others into something. Why were the others not talking about it? I don't know. The mystery that is international diplomacy these days, in particular, I do not know. However, what I would say is people should be talking. Sometimes it goes against the grain, and you think, why would you talk to these people? But if you don't talk, you never make any progress at all. So they've got to keep talking. But what I would also like to see is the West cutting down on some of their own hypocrisy about this stuff. Uh, you know, they talk about the non-proliferation treaty and everything else, and then they just ride a cart and horses right through it. So it's time for a bit more honesty. Keep talking, but recognise that things apply to both sides.
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. We'll come back to Scotland now for our next story, and that is that on World Alzheimer's Day, Scotland's emergency services have been reiterating their commitment to the National Dementia Pledge. Built on 4 key commitments, including ensuring staff have the tools and awareness to recognise and help people living with dementia, it also encourages organisations to be dementia-friendly employers by providing support to staff who are carers. The Dementia Pledge was first co-signed by Police Scotland, the Scottish Ambulance Service, and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in 2019, with the support of the Alzheimer's Scotland and the Centre for Policy and Practice at the University of the West of Scotland. The 4 commitments in the pledge are to ensure emergency services staff collectively have the knowledge, skills and understanding to recognise and support people living with dementia before, during and after an emergency incident. To work towards being dementia-friendly employers with suitable employment policies and procedures in place to allow us to support colleagues who become carers or support those who themselves develop dementia. To increase interprofessional working across the emergency services and beyond, to maintain and improve the general safety and well-being of people living with dementia, their families and carers, to support organisations and individuals across Scotland to develop more dementia-friendly communities. The announcement today also spoke of the rolling out on a national basis of the Herbert Protocol, which allows families who care for those with dementia to pre-advise Police Scotland of the dementia sufferers' details in the event that they go missing and need to be traced quickly. But Linda, as we saw today, Police Scotland, Health and Social Care Scotland, and Alzheimer's Scotland are also all involved. Do you think that multi-agency approaches like this work? And do you think a multi-agency approach makes the chances of success better?
I do actually, but it's dependent. It's dependent upon the public agency, in this case, Police Scotland, actually recognising the professionalism of the voluntary organisation, in this case, Alzheimer's Scotland, that is giving that advice. Because all too often, perhaps it's a terminology, you talk about the voluntary sector, the third sector, and people think, oh, it's all volunteers, it's not really professional. And that's just not the case. I mean, there are so many voluntary organisations that are absolutely professional. I mean, it's Alzheimer Scotland that we're delivering the training, the dementia care training, etc., and doing it very, very well. They understand the issues. So the likes of Police Scotland have to take that very, very seriously and make a real commitment to work in the way that's recommended. From what I read today, it looks like Police Scotland are willing to do that because they must recognise the issues. I mean, all MSPs have had cases where somebody suffering from a form of dementia has disappeared from home or has walked out of a care home. That happens. And then there's a complete panic trying to find the people. So any initiative at all that means that information is immediately to hand that the police can use and get onto has got to be welcomed. And I know that families of those who suffer from dementia, Alzheimer's, all these things will welcome this because it's a constant worry for them. So yes, good stuff. I'm glad the Scottish Government are helping to fund it, and I wish it all success.
Absolutely, Linda. And it crossed my mind that in addition to this Herbert Protocol form that families can use, Alzheimer's Scotland also has a thing called a Purple Alert, which is an app for your phone, which is designed to help find missing people with dementia. It struck me that it was another example of the way in which caring for dementia sufferers touches and affects all of us in our communities, whether we have people in the family who are who are currently suffering from dementia or may do so in the future. And I think that might have informed the Police Scotland approach a little bit. But this Purple Alert app, if someone goes missing, then people who are registered on the app are notified. And if they wish, they can help with local searches and can contribute to the attempts to rescue and recover sufferers quickly and safely. But we'll move on to our final story now. Scotland is doubling its financial support for the world's poorest and more vulnerable communities in their efforts to tackle the impacts of climate change. Starting next year, the Climate Justice Fund will increase to £6 million per year, providing £24 million in total across this Parliament. Scotland's Climate Justice Fund recognises that poor and vulnerable are the first to be affected by climate change and will suffer the worst, yet have done little or nothing to cause the problem. Putting people at the heart of international climate action, it supports people to build more resilient and equal communities. The Net Zero Secretary Michael Matheson highlighted the increase to this fund in his speech opening the Net Zero Nation debate in the Scottish Parliament today. So Linda, we started this evening with an item about Scottish Government funding being doubled in one area, and finally we have another area now for our final item. Is this increased spending as a result of an approach, of an overarching approach to spending by the Scottish Government, which is different to the approach that we see from the Westminster Government?
Well, there was a very quick recognition by the Scottish Government and indeed by the Scottish Parliament, because it was cross-party, that Scotland should make an additional contribution, a unique contribution in terms of international development. Because we should never forget that the UK international development funding, which did go through DFID and Department of International Development, they changed the name, I can't remember what to. Scotland makes its contribution to that, and we make an additional contribution through the Scottish budget. So there was a recognition of that. And there's also been a quick recognition in Scotland, again across the parties, I have to say, so it's the Parliament as well as the government, that in terms of climate change and climate justice, it's not just about one nation looking after itself, it's a worldwide issue. And we have to help people who are most vulnerable and who find it most difficult. And that's what this fund is all about. And what's unique about the Scottish Government's funding is that it goes directly to different groups that are working on the ground. It doesn't go from government to government. It goes through proper agencies to those who are directly affected and who are carrying out the work. So it's good stuff, and I'm really, really pleased to see that, because like so much these days in our world, we're all dependent on each other right across the globe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. And that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, and we would like you to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work, and if you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. Thank you to Linda the Cavalieri for joining us this evening. And thank you too for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.